their own people and not have them appointed, by the Holy Roman Emperor. And so they make very strong claims about their rights to, this is when Hildebrand was Pope, and I can't remember the emperor's name and number, but he was up there, Trivium II or something. And the Pope defended its libertas ecclesiae, its freedom to appoint its own people. Well, of course, as Luther said, man's like the drunken peasant riding the horse, he props up one side, he falls off the other. And in only 200 years, they're suddenly claiming not that they can appoint their own people, they can appoint
king's people, right? Himself, emperor.
And they do cite, of course, whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, which I agree with. We all agree. I think Dante refers to heavenly. But they also cite the fact that Charlemagne was crowned by the Pope, which is true. That's true. Charlemagne had to, save the butt, basically. It was an act of generosity. Thank you for saving me, and I will crown you. And then 300 years later, the Pope's saying, well, see, we get to make the decision. That's why it's very important for Dante to include the Charlemagne, and to show that he's the heir of the Roman Empire, which preceded the papacy. Not a new creation of the papacy.
You should meet this fellow. Yeah, he's one of the leading political theorists here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm old.
Yeah, I tell you, I really appreciate your paper. Is it available anywhere? Have you published it yet?
I know I'm not. No, I'm just working on it.
So where and when does the Mussolini paper come?
Well, yeah, that's it. Posthumous. There'll be a couple of posthumous items.
You're naming where the bodies are buried in that one?
I'm not sure that I actually haven't said it to the Rochester Institute paper. Wow. All I ever say there is this was a terrible country.
So what logic program do you use with your students?
Oh, I don't have a logic program. The thing is, I use just go through logical fallacies a lot.
Okay.
And then third quarter, and there's a little bit, you teach, okay, so you think about something like a conjunction. Okay? How is a conjunction going to play a role in meaning? Okay, in logic, in formal logic, we see conjunctions really coming out as things. So I don't really teach a course of logic.
Okay.
It's more of and it's just more of implementing logic that I see and understand into what we're dealing with. And so there's a million. You can look up logical fallacies, or you can look up how to do a syllogism, how to how to do everything online.
Okay.
So I'll just look it up and. I've taken a few logic courses, so if something comes to mind, then I'll just look for it, find it, and then put it into our day. I don't have a curriculum that I use. I have to make it as I go. So it's constantly expanding. The more things I find, the better it will be able to become. So it's something that I just started last year, and I hope that it becomes. I hope people are interested in sharing ways that it can become better. I'd love to. There's obviously things that I don't know about, So, but yes. So do you teach logic or?
I do teach a logic class. Yeah.
Oh, you do. Okay, and what have you found?
Well, we first started going to Logos when we first started this years ago.
Okay.
And so I've been using their program.
Okay.
Which is okay, but
yeah, they have. I know. I have looked a lot at Memoria. Memoria Press has a few different logic courses that they offer, and I don't. Have you seen Memoria?
I've looked at it. It's been a few years ago. But
Okay. And do you know? This one that you use you think is the most? It's the best?
I don't know if I would say it's the best.
Okay.
It was the first that was introduced to me, so I use it. But I haven't really expanded out to see what's out there.
Yeah. It's tough because logic is typically it's a class that sometimes it's taught in high school, but it's usually a college course. So I find that most of the textbooks are written for. And Wheelock's is a college Latin textbook, but we use Wheelock's. You just have to
the one from Logos is written for that level, junior high.
Oh, okay. Logos. Let me write that down.
Okay.
Because I'd like to look at that. Logos.
Logos.
Okay.
and they're a school from Idaho, and they put out their own textbook on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Look at
Thank
it.
you. What's your name?
Steve Caniglia.
Steve Caniglia.
From Riverton, Wyoming.
Good to meet you, Alex. Okay. Steve. Oh, speakers. No, are there any speakers around here? You know how to, oh, yes, speakers. I need speakers.
Speakers again?
Yes, I should
I
have.
think he just gave them to another person.
Did he really?
That doesn't look like a fit.
Yeah, I know. No,
Okay,
I
so you
have,
need one of these?
I have one of these.
Let me go check.
Thank you. I have this. You know, I don't know. The other one just barely fit in there as well, but I have this one, and I know this fits. And let's just say that so this. Yes, indeed. Which results in bad things. Okay, focus. Perfect. Now, this kind of looks like a projector, doesn't it? Do we just need an auxiliary cable? Because I have one of those in my car. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
Did you get the fit?
Yes, I did. Perfect. Okay. Does anyone need the worksheet from the first lecture? You do. Okay. Well, I have to speak up in this room. Sure. Thanks. No problem. Okay. All right. I'm going to give you all two things. One is the assignment that we'll work through at the end of class, at the end of this presentation, for about the last 20 to 30 minutes, just to give you a sense of the kind of assignment that we're doing. You don't have to look at it now. In fact, it'll make more sense if you wait to look at it. But just this way I can explore rather than linger. And I also have, we are just going to focus today on nouns, because we just don't have enough time to do. We'll be stretching nouns, but we'll get into it just a little bit. And it'll give you enough of a sense of how we take these questions into the 8th grade parts of speech. And who did I miss? This is an assignment from the end of that we'll do at the end. I wouldn't recommend reading it until the end, but up to you.
Will it help us to read it?
In fact, it'll make more sense if you wait till the end, I think. And this is a packet of quizzes, homework, and tests that just a little sample of them throughout the first quarter, just to give you an idea of. We can only really focus on a few things here. So we're gonna stick mostly with nouns today, and this is assignments and whatnot, but they have more of a focus than just nouns, just to give you more of a perspective on how you would do how you would focus on other parts of speech. Okay, this and you can look at this packet. After we're done with the first homework assignment, it'll be far less intimidating, I think. Did you get it right? And anyone need
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear this.
Okay. Hello again. I may need 2 cups of water this time. Thanks. This is our second part of teaching the Trivium as a class. Thanks for making it. So at the end of our last lecture, we were wrestling with the question, what is meaning? We've established that it is something that changes the internal and external world of those who participate in it. And at the same time, it can be something that helps us to preserve the world as we know it. this was an important question to get into because of how foundational it is for the whole year. So it's a question that we would spend about a week or a little more at the beginning of the year covering. About a week with different activities to help illustrate some of the points being made throughout the 1-hour overview that we covered during part 1. So this portion of the lecture will be focused more on considering first where this first question takes us, what is meaning, especially in regard to what will be taught in the class. As I said earlier, this will really go from theory to in-class sort of activity, and you'll see that with the assignment that we'll kind of work through together. Okay, so we'll start out first though with one more question, a question that really pulls us in to studying the 3 subjects of the Trivium as a comprehensive unit. Okay, you're good. So we come then to wonder how is this thing called meaning created? This sort of meaning that we've been discussing, and the answer to this also is not simple. In a way, something meaningful can be recognized by all of the senses. And I can hear or I can see or hear someone in need of something we call help. I can smell when my food is being burned. I can taste food that's burned or overcooked. This is essentially what 4D theaters are getting at today, bringing more meaning to the experience of film. You can see the movie better with help of 3-dimensional glasses, hear the movie, sometimes be in a theater that blows air on you or rumples your seat or brings a smell to your seat. I remember doing something like that in Disney World. I don't think that was a pleasant smell. Although all of these things, though, they bring one to feel and to sense what they are already watching and hearing. I think I think this has a sense. It has an ability to make the film more meaningful as a whole. So whether you are one creating meaning or perceiving meaning, meaning is something that requires order. It requires recognizable relationships to take place within the context of a structure. In other words, it requires grammar. Grammar as the most basic relationship between sights and sounds. Is the foundation of language, the foundation for meaning as a whole. And to be fair, many things can qualify as languages. As long as there's a grammar, that is, for example, a recognizable order present in a group of sights or sounds, one can create or perceive meaning in that group. And so one significance of teaching grammar is to teach that sounds and words can be organized into different ways, and the different ordering of sights and sounds leads to different meanings. If you're sloppy with the way you spell or word things, you aren't meaning what you want to be meaning, and it becomes obvious that you don't have complete control of yourself. And many people interpret this as foolishness. It's a very simple demonstration on how the order of sound affects what I mean. I can take three words. John, Jane, hurt, okay, and put them together in 3 different ways. It's the way that these words are ordered that determines the meaning of the whole. Jane hurt John, okay, will mean differently than John hurt Jane, even though we're using the exact same words, just in a different order. Both of these, while they are different, mean something that is fully comprehensible in comparison to hurt John Jane. Which we can't perceive any meaning in because we're taking a step away from true grammar. Unless, of course, we are referring to a person whose full name is John Jane, in which case the person saying such a thing would be issuing a command to hurt that person, rather than indicating that someone was being hurt by another. So the order of sounds brings us to start considering the creation of meaning. The same goes for pauses, the absence of sounds. The absence of sound can be part of meaning as a whole. English teachers, I think, enjoy explaining the significance of commas when they get to explain that there's a difference between a panda that eats shoots and leaves and a panda that eats shoots and then leaves. I have a good example of how both order and pauses contribute to make to make a successful joke here. Yes, this one. I think. Let's just do that. There we go.
What is a not joke?
A not joke is when we're trying to make fun of something, and what we do is we make a statement that we pretend is true, but at the end we say not, which means it's not true.
So teach me how to make one.
All right. So a not joke is, I would say, that suit is black. Not.
This suit
It's not black. No, not has to be the end.
Okay.
Okay.
This suit is black now.
This suit is black. Pause. You know what a pause is?
Yes.
This suit is black. Not.
This suit is black. Pause. Not.
You don't say pause. This suit is black. That's a pause. Not.
This suit is black.
Okay. I'm not.
Not.
So when we teach grammar, we get to teach how the different order of sights and sounds create different meanings. And this helps us to start thinking about the question, how is meaning created? This thing that both changes and preserves the world. Word order is inherently important in the English language, much more so than in inflected language like Latin or Greek, which you can study to find out why. Word order is something that one becomes very conscious of when one compares it to Latin or to Greek, when you compare one of those languages to English. And although it is very good to begin by considering the proper word order and relationships of nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs to one another, we should also come to realize that word order, grammar, is just the beginning of meaning. To go back to our earlier sentence, Jane hurt John. I can say this at least 3 more different ways while keeping the grammar, the word order, exactly the same. We're dipping our feet into a bit of the rhetoric of language here, but if we say Jane hurt John, we seem to be saying something a little bit different than Jane hurt John? You can see whoever, the first, it says, I just can't believe Jane, of all people, went out and hurt John, whoever he is. The second exemplifies more surprise at the idea of being hurt, the idea of hurting. Like, I knew Jane didn't like John, but she hurt him? And both of these, of course, are still different in meaning through the emphasis, Jane hurt John? So we'll talk about more about emphasis as a pathway to meaning a little bit later. But the point for now is that grammar, in other words, recognizable order, while it is foundational and essential for meaning, is only one part of our participation in meaning. If you're a teacher who has students that understand grammar, I think that you come to see why teaching grammar is indispensable, because it's foundational for any form of higher thinking and speaking. So when we ask ourselves, how is meaning created? One part of this answer is through grammar, through the recognizable order of sights and sounds. And then logic brings us to a more advanced stage of meaning. I think a fundamental way that it does this is through its familiarizing us with the concept of truth, and how within this concept of truth, we'll do well to understand the difference between validity and soundness. This is one of the first distinctions that one learns about in the logic course, and the distinction is important for our purposes because we can talk about grammar for as long as we want, word order, syntax, and during this discussion we can learn what is correct grammar. We can learn what is the correct way to order sights and sounds and words, and what are the incorrect ways to order sounds and words. But logic introduces us to the notion of truth, and truth is something that adds tremendous value to meaning, and therefore our ability to mean. So we're right to ask, how does logic introduce us to the notion of truth? The simple answer is that logical arguments end with a conclusion. And it's up to us to decipher whether or not this conclusion is true or false, and whether or not the argument is valid or sound. Premises must add up to get a true conclusion. But in logic, there are two ways that a conclusion can be true, or at least technically true. And the two ways are through validity and soundness. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Premises, yes. So the basic idea with validity and soundness is that I can make a valid argument that is not sound, or I can make an argument that is both valid and sound. Many logical fallacies are valid, but they fail to be sound. And I'll show you what I mean here. Let's take a famous argument that is both valid and sound, and you can write this down also along if that'll help you if you're visual. But a traditional syllogism in logic: Socrates is a man. Okay, all men are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. An argument is valid if the premises always lead to a true conclusion. In other words, there aren't any other premises that could alter this conclusion. And an argument is sound if and only if, which is an important distinction, if the argument is valid and all the premises are true. In other words, validity is concerned entirely with the structure of the argument, and soundness, on the other hand, is concerned both with the structure of the argument and the contents of everything in the argument. So, because of the content of premise 1, Socrates as a man is true, and the content of premise 2 is true, all men are mortal, the conclusion follows that from these premises, the conclusion is therefore also true. This argument is both valid and structurally sound. Okay, so to show you now, this is soundness. Okay, I'll show you what just validity is. Okay, we can replace premise 2. Let's just replace premise 2. Okay, this is valid, but not sound. Socrates is a man. All men have scales. Socrates has scales. Okay, so you see we've replaced premise 2 and that alters our conclusion. Here we have the first premise, okay, Socrates is a man. We think that, yeah, that's true. And, you know, I can look at myself and suppose that I don't have scales and conclude, okay, premise 2 is actually false. But the thing with validity is it doesn't really matter if premise 2 is false, because premise 1 and premise 2 add up to get the conclusion. So that's still a valid argument. In other words, in a way, it kind of seems true. So you see how we go from soundness to validity. Both of these things are things that we search out and learn in logic. Okay, so here our argument is still valid, but the conclusion does, because the conclusion does follow from the premises. But because we should doubt the certainty of premise 2 as a false premise, our conclusion must lack soundness. Therefore, the argument is not sound. This is the way that many. Oh yes. Okay. So so this is the way that many logical fallacies work. As they sound appealing at first, okay, when they're first encountered. But after one checks the premises for truth, one will find that the argument is only valid and it's actually not sound. Here's an example of what I mean. Okay, this is something called the either-or fallacy. Okay, the fallacy is either A or B. Oh no, this is a mistake. Not A. Okay, I think. Therefore B. Okay, not just forget this. Okay, either A or B, not A, therefore B. Okay, so I was at the mall the other day when this guy came up to me and was trying to sell me his skin product. He put this cream on my wrist and explained how the cream worked to revitalize my skin. After I seemed uninterested in buying a skincare product for $180 at a kiosk in the mall, he said, this is a true story, you'll want to get this for your skin, or eventually your pores will fill up and you'll look awful. This was a sales pitch. Either you get this, or you'll look awful. You can see that his advertisement tried to get me to say, I don't want to look awful, therefore I will get this product. Maybe you can offer me a deal. He used the either-or fallacy to keep me from considering other alternatives. A, I could get another product to prevent myself from looking awful. B, I might forego buying a product and not end up looking like his prediction. Or C, that I might forego buying the product and not mind looking awful. But because it can be established that there are not just two options here, we can see that if I would have agreed to the conclusion to buy the product, not look awful, therefore buy the product, the dialectic between us could have actually been valid, but not sound. It would have seemed true, but it wouldn't have been sound, okay? Now, you get the idea here that logic forces the student to consider grammar and meaning in a way that requires an evaluation of whether grammatical structures lead to truth or to falsity. When we consider logical arguments, it's very important to have a strong grasp on grammar in order to consider the truth value of both premises and conclusions. And as a consequence, be able to distinguish between validity and soundness. For example, this wine is rated #1 by consumers. Fine grammar. But logic makes us examine what the statement is actually trying to get us to conclude. It makes us consider how well put together is this grammatical string of words. So you can see how the two work here, grammar and logic. Someone who understands grammar will ask, who are the consumers that are rating this wine? And then you pay them to do it. It's quite amazing to think that through something as simple as well-ordered sound, we can come to see and appreciate the much higher concept of truth through conclusions that are valid and sound. I'll dive more into the relationship between grammar and logic a little bit later in this presentation, but finally we come to consider the third part of our answer to this question. How is meaning created? And that is rhetoric. When one asks, how is meaning created? We've established so far that sights and sounds enter into an ordered and recognizable relationship. We call this relationship grammar, and we've established that this relation can function appropriately or inappropriately, logically or illogically, which allows one to see this relationship as truthful, partially truthful, or not truthful. When we think about grammar and logic, and how these things help us to participate in meaning, we are usually referring to how we mean, as opposed to focusing on how what we meant is understood by others. Consider these sentences, for example. I was grammatically correct. I was logical. Neither one of these sentences really requires you to be involved with what I meant in order for them to be true. I could have just as well said, for example, whether you agree with me or not, I was logical. So one fundamentally different thing between grammar and logic and rhetoric is that my desire to be rhetorical, it requires me to actually be concerned with how you understand what I mean. What I say actually must affect you in the way that I intend, or I'm not being rhetorical, at least not very good at it. So when we take a step away from grammar and logic, we take a step toward the consideration of the other, of our audience. We think about who are the people that are hearing us, and how are they hearing us. And we can start out very broadly by just considering how our English sound is heard. If we take our English language, for example, we rarely listen to. We're almost incapable of just listening to how the language of English sounds to someone who doesn't know it at all. Here's a clip of what is called fake English. It'll give you a quick idea of the sound of English, which is hard to hear because we're always listening to our language for what's being meant, much more than how the language is actually sounding. Here. So, anyways, you get it. So a Polish friend of mine says that her friends who don't know English think that it sounds like someone trying to say something with noodles in one's mouth. A French friend of mine says that when he and his friends were watching Harry Potter, his little brother came into the room and asked why everyone in the movie was continually singing. This is a great indicator, though, that French is much more of a flat language, that its tone does not vary as drastically as the tones do in English. You can consider how our sarcasm functions of this as a form of rhetoric. It's largely based off of our tone. I'm feeling great today. It carries almost the exact opposite meaning than I'm feeling great today. Just through the tone. This is English sarcasm. And the French observation of how much intonation is in our language is the first clue to the idea that a flatter French language will actually have to function differently. For example, sarcasm is going to come about through the actual words themselves that are being used in French, rather than the way the words sound through the one that's used through the tone. So the point is that even sound that is not understood can lend itself to an interpretation. But our language is not a fake language. When we talk, we're actually meaning something. And I think music is an excellent way to make one very important point about language. So here, I want to have us listen to this. This is a song. So while we're listening, just take some time to write down words that come to your mind. And this is not, I don't think, actually by Beethoven, but this is the picture that was associated with the song. But just as words come to your mind, just write down what you get out of this.